Good afternoon, patrons, and welcome to the March, not even slightly, 2019 Patroncast. It is that time of the month again, and March was an interesting month. March was a very, very interesting month. A slightly nerve-wracking month, because it was a month of big changeovers. It's very rare that we simultaneously do a switchover for both of our biggest series, the strategy series of Thursday and Sunday, and the Fallout series, but they both just happened to fall in this last March, when New California went back to Fallout 2, which was also a bit nerve-wracking in general, because, going back to old classic Fallout, as much as it comes up and as much as people say, oh, you need to go back and look at Fallout 2, there are some people who only got into Fallout after those days who might not necessarily be so interested in the old stuff. It's had a good start, though. It's had a good start. I think a slightly better start than Fallout 1 did. I think that's partly because I've put it together better. I think it's better as a series. I think I've done a lot more work on the UI to make sure the UI scaling's right so you can read the text a lot more easily. I think I kind of set it up right so it had a stronger first couple of parts. So, yeah, there's various ways in which I think Fallout 2's had a better opening than Fallout 1, which is good. It's looking good so far. Long may that continue. I mean, it's nice to be back to, a core game, especially as we've had mods and Fallout 76. I think there was a bit of appetite in the community to get back and do, classic Fallout. So I really wanted to do something either in New Vegas or in old Fallout. So it just happened to be Fallout 2's turn. I think Fallout 4 You Only Live Once is going to probably come after that. So I was pretty happy with that. And of course, Rome Total War came back to the channel with Barbarian Invasion. I was never too worried about that. I wasn't worried about that at all. I knew that people were going to love that. But honestly, people have loved it even more than I thought. People have really been enjoying that one. It's been doing so well, even better than I thought it was going to. So that's been a great success. And I think we've had some really fun one-offs too, actually. I think we've had some great one-offs this last month. I think the Stellaris Console Edition was really good. Undead Horde and Dawn of Man and Hypnospace Outlaw and the various little Star Wars bits and pieces I've been doing. Republic Commando, that was flipping great. We the Revolution was a great video. I think we've done some really good stuff in March. I've been really happy with March. So, yeah, I went into it a bit nervous because we were making some big changes to the main series, but views have been good. They've been up, which is good because they were a little bit low in February. So it's nice to see the channel in a healthier place, which is very, very nice indeed. And we've had some big stuff over the last week. Some really big stuff. We had the massive Rome Total War special, which I did because I was originally planning to do something else. I was actually going to do a proper April Fool's video. But then I thought, actually, the best April Fool's video would be a video that looks like it might be an April Fool's and then wasn't. Like a surprise video essay. I told Claire it wasn't a video essay, it was kind of a video essay. And actually, I originally did it because I thought, okay, I'm a bit pressed for time. I'm not sure I've actually got time to do a full April Fool's video with loads of different recordings because plenty of those have to be a little bit scripted and whatever. So I'll just do some Rome Total War. I can do that without a script or planning or much time recording. Yeah, there were 16 to 20 hours of recording behind that thing. So that was a mistake, just a little bit. Then we had EGX, just this last couple of days. I was actually at EGX on Friday. In fact, actually, I met a few people there. I met a few community members, so if you were one of them, hello, it was lovely to see you. But the big reason we're behind right now, and we're a little bit on the busy side, I'm not actually allowed to talk about yet. I can't even give you a hint. I've been locked into silence with some very, very serious sounding paperwork. By a week from now, you'll know what I'm talking about. I've got something big in the offing, alright? Something very big and very cool is on its way. I cannot discuss it in the slightest. I'm so sorry, but you'll know. Next Patroncast we can go into it in big detail, but something really big is coming. It's going to be flipping awesome, alright? But yeah, good March, looking forward to a good April, and as I say, April's going to have something really amazing in it. So we'll discuss that next month. Let's move over to the questions. And I think we'll start with the most recent questions on this occasion. John, as someone who previously worked in marketing, I'm surprised you completely avoid mentioning subscribing to the channel, Patreon, etc. It's true. I'm much better at marketing other stuff than I am at my own. But that's partly because it became a bit of a running joke a while ago that really annoying YouTubers would be like, hey, hit that like button, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And it became a running gag that really bad YouTubers, really annoying YouTubers would do that. So I never wanted to push things too heavily, but it has been about 2 years since I actually mentioned Patreon in an actual video. I do mention it in the live streams, but I don't really mention it in the videos. So I need to get a bit more comfortable doing that. That's certainly true because YouTubers, you're probably well aware, the ad revenue has been in a long-term state of decline and that has not changed recently, so Patreon is more and more important than ever before. I should get into the habit of mentioning it. You're absolutely 100% right. But in terms of subscribing to the channel, I don't think people need to be told to subscribe. I'm not really convinced that helps much. If they've come to the channel because they want to watch something, and if you do a good job on that video and it's a good video, and as long as you actually make it clear in that video, hey, I do similar-ish videos, then people will probably choose to subscribe. So my tactic for getting people to subscribe is, really regular videos, a video a day, and then keeping the series I do on a very regular schedule as well. So people know if they like something, there's plenty more of it, so they have a reason to stick around. I'd rather give people actual reasons to stick around rather than just telling them to do so. So that's what I feel like for subscribing. So I never want to be the sort of YouTuber that's pushing for likes and comments. If I do a good job, that should happen by itself. But Patreon, you're right. I should mention that more often. I'm just very bad at it because I feel very self-conscious about it. Speak of the devil, from what I was saying earlier on EGX, John, it was so lovely meeting you at EGX, and honestly hope to see you again next year. It was lovely meeting all of you too. It was a really nice group, including a lot of regulars I know from the Discord, the live streams. It was really nice to see, including people from all over the world. We had people from Australia and all sorts of places. John, any chance you'll look at Generation Zero? Aha! I just did on this last Friday. Interesting game. Not perfect, needs some polish, but interesting, very compelling in its own way. I think that was a good video, actually. I really enjoyed putting that one together. Dear Jan, I believed you used American John's voice 3 times during the last Patroncast, and I hope to never hear it. Oh, I'm so sorry. Right, that was a comment that was complaining about American John, not asking for more of it. Right, my mistake. I noticed you've been playing a lot of Star Wars games lately. Building up for anything in particular? No, to be honest, not really. I've just been really into Star Wars games, and the thing is, every time I play one, someone's like, hey, you should play this other one, and then I find it, it's really cheap, because there's loads of really old ones, because all the ones people seem to think are good are from years and years and years ago, so it's pretty easy to get hold of them really cheaply, because plenty of them weren't so old you can't get hold of them on modern computers and modern consoles, especially on the Xbox, thanks to all the backwards compatibility stuff Microsoft have focused on. Such good work there. I really admire and respect that. It's the gold standard. I really hope more companies do that sort of thing going forward. But it's just been so easy to get hold of all the old classic LucasArts Star Wars games, still running really nicely on PC and on console. So yeah, every time I play one, people say, hey, you'd really like this, and I go and play it, and it's really good too. So it's not really been building to anything, it's just been a kind of Civilization one more turn thing, except with, oh, just one more Star Wars game then. John, please play Borderlands 3, but also team up with Claire, Matt, and Dan. You're absolutely right, I will be doing some form of team up there, if only because it just feels like playing Borderlands single player is just totally missing the point. That's just not the way to play it. So, though I normally play games single player, even if they do have multiplayer functionality, Borderlands 3, 100%, that will be played with other people. I don't know who or how precisely. I need to actually ask Dan, whether he's into Borderlands at all. But it might be fun for me and Dan to, do that and then, have revolving other guests in. So we could, have different guests each time. Because I don't think you actually desperately need to, have, people who are precisely the same level or skill level or whatever. So we could probably do something fun there. I don't know what yet. I haven't discussed it with anybody. But you're 100% right. When it does come around, I will be looking to do something multiplayer there. I can't imagine doing single player just because Borderlands, if it's anything like 1 anyway, just won't suit it. Also, why didn't you continue with the Metro series? The videos were great. They were, I agree, I really enjoyed my time with it. And we did the entire full first game, but generally I don't let series of the same franchise run into each other. In the same way that we did XCOM, and XCOM 2 hasn't happened yet, but it totally will happen at some point. We did Metro, I made sure I knew roughly what actually happened in Last Light, and then we looked at Exodus. And it went pretty well. It wasn't spectacular in terms of views, but it was alright. Enough that at some point in the future, when we've got a quiet moment where there isn't a huge amount coming out, 100% we could do a series on Last Light. I just don't know when exactly. I don't really have a time in mind for it. Yes, and a few questions on this topic. Final Fantasy VII. Lots of people seem to like the video and a lot of people are calling out for a series. But here's the interesting thing. Final Fantasy VII actually looks like it's going to be the worst performing video of the entire week it was released in. Generation Zero, despite being released 2 days after, already has more views than Final Fantasy VII. Bad As You did way better. The series, Fallout and Barbarian Invasion, both did better. The Rome special obviously did, but that's a bit of a special occasion, so let's not actually consider that one at this point. And at the time of recording this, I haven't actually released Alien Isolation, so I don't know how that's going to do, but I would strongly suspect it will outperform Final Fantasy VII. The thing is, like many nostalgia games, that tends to sometimes get slightly on the lower views, but the views that do show up are really into it. So I would not object to that coming back in, say, a live stream, so I can, discuss it with the people who are super into it. The thing is, I'm not 100% convinced it would work as a normal series, just because a game like that features an awful lot of fights over and over again in terms of, random encounters, just to, get XP, level up and all of that stuff. The story and the environments and the character stuff, that's all really interesting to me. But Final Fantasy, I worry there's a bit too much grindiness for it to work as a series, because I suspect I might need to record for 4 or 5 hours to get an episode I'm happy with, where there's, some good story progress, good character progress, good new weapons or whatever coming in, just so I feel like, sufficient progress has been made in an episode that I'm happy to wrap that episode up, so I feel like, something substantial has actually occurred. So I'm not 100% sure it's going to work as a normal series, but I do feel like I would like it to come back as a live stream at some point, just because some people are really into it, and that's the sort of thing I'd like to share, because one thing I am very glad about is the Final Fantasy VII community and fans did not seem to be in any way toxic or aggressive. And sometimes when I go back and look at old nostalgia games like that, when it's new to me and I don't have the nostalgia for it and I don't know it very well, people can get a bit nasty about it and a bit sniffy about it, and they can be like, oh, you're not appreciating this enough, or you're not appreciating it right, or I can't believe you've overlooked this, or God, you're not doing this game justice, basically is kind of what a lot of people say, and variants thereupon. Final Fantasy VII, I didn't really get that. It just seemed to be a lot of people who really enjoyed and remembered the game, who were really enjoying watching someone experience it for the first time. And I had a really nice time with it, and I'll say it's an incredibly immersive game. After the first 10 minutes, I didn't even see the graphics anymore. It just is a really immersive, aesthetically well-designed game, so you just don't see it. It still looks fine, because you get so immersed you stop seeing graphics, which has always been the madness of chasing more and more polygons and getting more and more graphically impressive games, because at some point, it doesn't matter. Yes, if you put one bit of footage next to another bit of footage side by side, you can see that one bit might look slightly more impressive than the other, but no one plays games with 2 bits of footage next to each other. You're playing one game at a time, and if you're immersed, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. Plenty of the most immersive games of all time look very scruffy, but they still play very well, and as long as you're immersed in the game, it doesn't matter. So yeah, Final Fantasy VII. Not sure it's going to be a normal series, but I could see it coming back in some capacity, yes. Hi John, the Fallout 4 Survivor run did a good job of showing the massive Bethesda effect, where the first few levels are insanely hard, and then you become a god of death. If you were in charge of the next Fallout game, how would you balance the difficulty so it was well balanced from beginning to end? Interesting question, very interesting question indeed. And you see, part of it is, I see people raise this as a problem. I've never really had a massive problem with this. I don't mind a game where at the beginning of the game you're very weak and you're killed easily and it's incredibly difficult, but as you go through the game, as long as you're paying attention, crafting, leveling up, whatever, making sensible decisions, you become stronger and you can deal with the world, and by the end of the game you can be a god of death. I kind of like that, because it kind of gives you a sense of character growth. The same sort of thing happens in the Far Cry games, and I don't mind it there either. I think it actually works pretty well. I know it feels a bit weird, because it means you've got an inverted difficulty curve, where the game starts off at its hardest and then gets progressively easier. But I don't really mind that, to be honest. I don't mind it at all, especially when it's part of, say, Fallout 4 Survival Mode, where it's an optional difficulty mode you do after you played the game normally. So yeah, it's a real challenge at first, but I've never minded it. I've never actually minded it. I mean, I guess if there was one thing I would do, it would be a fairly simple fix, which is I'd slow down leveling up, which is what happens in the Jay Sawyer mod of New Vegas. The level cap in that is reduced from 50 down to 35, and XP and whatever is adjusted too, so as a result of that, you actually level up a bit more slowly. So it slows down your progression to becoming an insane, unstoppable god machine. But yeah, for me, it's never actually been a real problem. I actually kind of like the sense of character growth that comes out of it. The next question's about Fallout 76 Survival Mode. How do we potentially fix this? Given, right now, in adventure mode, there's no real tension when players meet because they just sort of walk past each other because there's no real meaningful way for them to interact, versus in survival mode, everyone just murders everyone else. How do you make players meeting somewhat tense without it being combat by default? I think what it needs is some sense of permanent consequence for the character that opens hostilities. Like, I was actually thinking about this recently because in the most recent part of Fallout 2, you have the option of joining the Slavers Guild in the Den, but they explicitly state to you, if you do, you get tattooed on your forehead to mark you as a slaver forever. So in another Fallout game, while you might just do that just to join a faction, do its quests, and then leave and do something else, the game makes it very clear there, you are going to have some form of permanent marker. There's going to be a permanent mark against your record that other people will be able to see and react to, which made me not want to do it, even though it might have been a good way to say, sneak up to the generator, turn it off, lead a slave insurrection, diddly diddly dee. It really made me think twice about joining a faction, when in other Fallout games, you might just join a faction because, screw it, you may as well join every faction you can and then make decisions down the line. That was really interesting. And I think Fallout 76 Survival Mode and Fallout 76 in general could be made to work if there was the idea that anyone might be able to attack anybody, but if you do, it leaves a permanent mark on your character. So say, for example, when you see someone coming up to you, it kind of says their name on screen, it says who they are, it says who's around. If that person has literally never attacked another player, then that name would be in a certain colour. If they've ever attacked another player, i.e. been the aggressor that started the fight, then it could be a different colour. Maybe there could be like a time limit on it, just on the off chance you accidentally shot someone you didn't mean to, so it wasn't a permanent mark against your character. And if you've actually engaged someone, say, in the last 24 hours or in the last week or something, your name's flagged in red. So everybody knows ahead of time, hey, this character is a risk. Potentially those characters could be flagged on everyone's map as a particularly high-risk encounter, so people can try and avoid them, and that person maybe loses map privileges, so can't see anyone else on their map. Something like that, perhaps. So if you shoot someone, it matters. So when you run into someone who actually, doesn't have any of those marks against them, at any moment you could shoot them or they could shoot you. But you've both got a reputation to maintain for not doing so. And obviously, the moment you do have a reputation for shooting first, people have an incentive to shoot at you first. So if you see someone with a bit of a dodgy reputation coming your way, you'd probably fire, under the assumption that if you don't, they'll just come and fire at you. So, I don't know, some form of permanent reputation system tied to your own character for how aggressive they've been in the past might calm down survival mode a little bit. I'm not 100% sure it would work, but it's worth a go, isn't it? Have you ever seriously thought about doing a Classics Corner series or podcast? I really have, but it would be a huge amount of work and a huge amount of time invested into it, and I don't really know how well it would go. I mean, I'd love to do it, and I've been thinking about it more seriously recently, because Up Is Not Jump just started doing that really interesting physics series that's fantastic, and I've really been enjoying that, and I'd love to do something like that, like going through the entirety of the Hellenic mythic corpus, like chronologically, going through all the myths one by one and how they interact and all the really wacky retellings of them and the different versions of the same story. I think that could be really interesting, but it would take a lot of work to do, so I'm not in a position to do it right now, but I have been thinking about that a lot more seriously since Up Is Not Jump did the physics thing, yes. What's your opinion as a person with experience in marketing about how Epic is handling the Epic Games Store? Okay, I've got an interesting answer to this, which is you can sort of tell what sort of marketer is being involved in this sort of decision making, assuming marketing gets a say at all, which is the brand marketing team isn't allowed to have a say. The direct response marketing team, they are totally on board with what Epic are doing right now. Because the thing is, I think Jim Sterling made an excellent point on this. As much as it may be unpopular in some quarters, it 100% will work. Like, for decades in the gaming industry, it has always been true that exclusivity is a good way to sell, well, traditionally, consoles. But absolutely, exclusivity drives launcher downloads too. 100%. There is no chance it doesn't work. There may be backlash against it, but it will work. If your only goal is get as many people installing this launcher as fast as possible, then what they're doing is almost certainly a very effective tactic. I think they could have handled it a lot better, because the thing is, if they'd gone in a lot more softly, And rather than spending money to drive as many exclusives as they could, what they'd instead done is just said, hey, let's have stuff on the Epic Store and on Steam simultaneously, but because Epic's cut is lower than Steam's, therefore we can actually do two things, which is we can actually have the game slightly cheaper on Epic than it would be on Steam, and the devs can still get more money from a sale on Epic than they would do on Steam. Because if you had an option of buying a game for, say, £40 on Steam or £35 on Epic, and you knew if you bought it on Epic, the devs would get more money than you purchased it on Steam, I think a lot of people would be willing to consider going over to Epic just so devs get more money and they get a cheaper game. So I think that would have actually been the better strategy. Use that really low cut they want, their 12% versus Steam's 30%, and let some of it go into a price drop and the rest of it go back to the devs. I think that would be a really positive message. And that's probably what the brand marketing people wanted them to do, but they decided to ignore that. So, yeah, I think they could have done a better job if they'd done it that way, but they decided to go for exclusivity, and honestly, though there is absolutely a big vocal minority who are not liking it, the data that I've seen so far, it's a little bit anecdotal, but when, devs have stood up and said, hey, this game sold pretty damn well, actually the games on the Epic Store seem to be selling decently, so it seems to be working. It's driving the downloads, and despite the very vocal cries for boycotts, actually the games seem to be selling pretty damn well. And as more and more big games that people really want to play, like Borderlands 3, like Outer Worlds, move over onto the Epic Store, I think the resistance is going to crumble pretty fast. But honestly, while there's been a lot of noise about boycotting Epic Games, as far as I can tell, the sales data looks like it's saying people, for the most part, aren't really boycotting at all. Who is your favourite astronaut? I've always had a fondness for Michael Collins, who was the third man on the mission to the moon, and the only one of the three who didn't actually get to walk on the moon, because it always just struck me as a little bit sad that he had to go through, all the training and all the stress and all the worry of actually taking part in the moon mission, and he had to, fly all the way up there, but he never actually got to walk on the moon. And if you ask people, who's on the moon mission, most people would be like, oh yeah, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and someone else, I think? I don't know. He doesn't feel like he's very well remembered, so yeah, I just feel like the Ringo Starr of the moon landing, Michael Collins, is probably my favourite. Any chance you'll be playing the new Anno 1800 game? Yeah, it does look pretty cool. It does look pretty cool, and I think I have heard from the devs at some point, so I don't know precisely when, but hopefully I should be bringing you that at some point soon. I would imagine that will come during April. Yes. Also, any chance you might dive back into Frostpunk? I played it recently and it felt different from when it first released. A lot harder, I feel. Interesting. Could be a good live stream there. I might well give that a bit of a look-see. Will we ever get to see more Smash Bros. Ultimate with Nerd Cubed? When Dan is available, yes, he's been very busy recently, so I don't know exactly what's going on with that series. We'll have to see. Because if something else shows up, we decide to do something a bit bigger with Sea of Thieves or Borderlands 3 when that comes out or whatever, I don't know. Hopefully we will get to finish that up at some point, yes. Would you consider giving a bit more time over for those keep the plate spinning simultaneously simulation tycoonish games that I love so much? With a specific mention for RimWorld. Oh yeah. RimWorld, I have been meaning to give a look-see at. I know it's launched properly. I'm told it's got a much better tutorial these days. I'm told it's much improved and it was already pretty damn good. So, yeah, that is actually on the schedule, hopefully, for later this month. It's actually been there for a while. It keeps getting kind of shunted out by newer stuff that's launching. But RimWorld should be showing up soon, yes. John, in Fallout 3, what do you think of intelligence as a dump stat? Oh, I would strongly disagree with that. Like Fallout 3 and New Vegas, I think you'd want to have Intelligence 9 under all circumstances and bump it up to 10 through the surgical implants and the bobblehead as fast as possible. Purely because that feeds into how many skill points you've got, so you can get up to small guns of 100 in no time at all. Start unlocking more doors earlier, hacking more computers earlier. I just can't see a scenario where you wouldn't want to have Intelligence 9 on a character in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, which is why I am glad it was changed in Fallout 4 to not be so ridiculously overpowered. So you'd still want a decently high intelligence to access the best crafting perks, but honestly probably not higher than 6. So yeah, I can't really see intelligence as a dump stat. I see it the other way. Charisma's the dump stat for Fallout 3 and particularly New Vegas, just because you can offset it by putting skill points into speech. Not so much in Fallout 3 because of the way it's calculated there, but in New Vegas, absolutely. John, have you tried out Zelda Breath of the Wild since getting a Switch? No, actually, I haven't. The only Nintendo games I've got are Smash Bros. Ultimate and the new Mario Kart, which I can't remember which number it is. Was that 7 Deluxe or 8 Deluxe? Whichever the new one on the Switch is. I've got the new Mario Kart. I haven't actually played Odyssey or Breath of the Wild. I am meaning to get to Breath of the Wild at some point, but I'm kind of more excited by seeing more and more rumours that Wind Waker HD might be coming to Switch at some point this year. Because if that happens, 100% that's a series. Because Wind Waker is probably my favourite Zelda on balance. I think it's wonderful. John, with the release of the standalone Oculus Quest and the Rift S at the end of the next month, as well as the Valve Index in June, what do you think the future of VR will look like? Very, very interesting indeed, but until the price comes down significantly, I still don't think it's going to reach mass market appeal. The price still needs to come down very significantly. But depending on exactly how they work and the specs and all the rest of it, yeah, a standalone VR unit I could potentially be very interested in. Because the reason I don't do more VR in terms of just like day-to-day gaming is it's a faff to set up. It's very, very faffy to set up. So having a thing where you could just slip it on and basically just get going immediately, especially for Beat Saber, that would be amazing, because I would genuinely just turn that into like a daily workout routine. I just do daily Beat Saber as exercise. But yeah, the faff setup of it means I don't do that right now. So I could be very tempted by that sort of thing, yes, but I'd need to see him in action first. And recommendations for VVVVVVV, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. I've never been sure. Is that just like VVVVVV, or is it supposed to be like V? I don't know. However you pronounce that. And N++. Again, hopefully pronounced M++. VVVVVVV I'm not so familiar with. M++ I've seen Dan play, and it looks sort of interesting. VVVVVVV, I'm sure I've actually considered that at some point. I can't remember why I didn't do it at that time, but yeah, as I've actually had a nice time with Super Meat Boy and Downwell, might well be worth a look-see. Not currently on my shortlist, but I'll keep them in mind. What's your favourite game that you've not actually personally played? Ooh, really interesting question. Probably Earthbound, where I've not played it myself, but I watched Chugga Conroy's series on it. So that just seemed like a wonderful, wonderful game. So I had a really fun time watching that and experiencing it, but I've never actually played it myself. And as a follow-up question, favourite game you've not played and probably won't play? Honestly, same answer. It's probably Earthbound again, just because as far as I'm aware, that hasn't been re-released for the Switch or anything, so I'm not sure how I even would play it today, to be honest. John, I know you've mentioned before some good spots to visit in London. Are there any spots that are very interesting or not well known about that you feel should be experienced? I wouldn't say that what I'm about to suggest is like, you know, some secret that people don't know about, but I think people when they visit London might not get to it just because it's not central, it's a little bit of a way out, and that's Kew Gardens. Kew Gardens they're just wonderful, they're lovely. I've been there with my family before. They're just a wonderful, magical place, and I thoroughly recommend visiting it. But it's not in the centre, so I think a lot of tourists just don't get out there unless they're spending an extended period of time in London. But they're well worth a look. If you had to give up your arms or your legs, which would you choose? Oh, legs. Absolutely, I'd give up legs. Because if I lose my arms, I can't do my job at all. Like, this just comes to an end. Because while there are specialist controllers that let people, like, control games in all sorts of interesting, unique ways, they don't work with many games. You wouldn't be able to play games in the same way. Honestly, yeah, it would have to be my legs. Just because over recent years, that's become less and less of a barrier to engaging with society. Like, you know, the vast majority of buildings are now wheelchair accessible. Public transportation is wheelchair accessible. You can pretty much just live a normal, full, rich life, even if you have no ability to use your legs whatsoever, which is great. Whereas, yeah, losing your arms, I feel like that's a much bigger barrier to engaging with the world in terms of professionally and personally and all sorts of reasons. So, yeah, absolutely, I'd give up my legs ahead of my arms. John, I absolutely adored your Crusader Kings 2 series, in particular because of the narrative. I haven't watched any of your Stellaris videos, however, and was wondering how these compare to the Crusader Kings 2 series in that regard. Now, it's not quite the same, because Stellaris doesn't really have the same character focus the Crusader Kings 2 has. I'd say probably my Rome Total War series and my Medieval 2 Total War series is more similar to Crusader Kings 2 than Stellaris is. Stellaris has its own narrative too, but it's the narrative of entire species and planets rather than individuals. But I do think there's still a fair bit of, like, you know, role-playing and storytelling going on there. I don't think you need to go back to the beginning, however, because there's like been some big changes in Stellaris, and generally I start a new series when there's been big gameplay changes, you can probably jump in with the most recent Megacorp series, because the first 2 episodes explain the basic mechanics all over again, because they all just changed. Or you could go for the Apocalypse series, because that was when the movement changed, and that had the Tenets of Tabby in it, which was a fun species as well. So I think you could really jump in anywhere there, you don't need to go back to the beginning. But yeah, potentially if you haven't watched them, maybe go for the Rome Total War and Medieval 2 first, but Stellaris I think should still be able to scratch that itch as well. Comments on the Joker teaser/trailer. Interesting, but I'm not sure it's really for me. It just seems a bit grim, to be honest, because the focus seems to be on slightly fragile man being horribly battered by society until he loses it and starts killing people, and that just seems like a bit of a downer to me, to be honest. Like, part of the reason I quite like the MCU films is, for the most part, though they do have very serious, very dramatic, very sad moments in them, generally the tone is quite light. You leave the cinema feeling like you've had a good, fun time, and I feel like I wouldn't leave Joker feeling like I'd had a good, fun time. I feel like I'd leave Joker feeling like I'd just been a bit beaten down and depressed, to be honest. So I'm not sure I'll go and see it, but I'll be interested to see the reviews. It certainly looks interesting. John, I'm turning 21 this month, and that's the legal drinking age here in the US. I plan on getting drunk. What are your favourite drunk stories or recommended alcohols? Ooh, yeah, cocktails. I love cocktails. Just drink mojitos all day, every day. Or Pibbs and lemonade. Pibbs and lemonade is great. I do love that stuff. That's marvellous. In terms of drunk stories, oh blimey, you're taking me back there because, yeah, I used to drink a fair bit when I was a student, but after I left university, I only drank very casually and never to excess, to be honest. So you're taking me a long way back there. Oh blimey, what have I got for you? Nothing desperately dramatic or scandalous, to be honest. I was once given a verbal warning by a policeman for doing magic in front of muggles after yelling Expecto Patronum extremely loudly in a residential area at 2 AM. Luckily, the police officer had a bit of a sense of humour and did specifically give me the warning for doing magic in front of muggles. But I got the message and decided to shut up and just go home at that point, yes. John, Baba Is You livestream. When? Okay, interesting one there. I can see the appeal, but also I can see the not appeal. Because the thing is, a live stream like that, there is often a single solution to a puzzle. So the moment someone's given away that solution in the chat, everyone in the chat knows the solution. Then it's just a question of waiting for me to catch up and figure it out by myself. So I'm at a disadvantage because you guys have got a hive mind and I don't. So at that point, do you have the frustration of watching me fail to solve something you now know how to solve? Or the moment it's in the chat, do you tell me how to solve it? In which case, I don't solve anything by myself. So I'm not 100% sure it would actually work as a live stream, but I'll give it some thought. John, if you could choose between Rome and Rome 2 Total War, which would you pick and why is it Rome 1? Well, Rome 1, yes, absolutely. I don't even know why he'd ask me that question. Obviously, it's Rome 1. Rome 2 is not as bad as people say, and it's improved a lot since launch. Like, the main reason Rome 2 is a bit of a butt of jokes is because it was in a very bad state at launch. But they've done a lot to fix it, and then there was a period of peace and quiet, and then they sort of went back to fixing it more recently and added a bunch of new stuff into it. So these days it's in pretty good shape, all things considered. But still, it just can't beat the magic of the original Rome. What do you think of the Elder Scrolls Blades? Honestly, I don't really have an opinion on it one way or the other. Like, I don't do any mobile gaming whatsoever. Like, at one point a few years ago, I downloaded Angry Birds just out of curiosity. Didn't really get it. Like, I don't know what the rules are for the most common colour matching games on mobile in the world. I haven't really played any mobile games since Snake 2 on my old Nokia well over a decade ago. It's just not my thing. I never do mobile gaming, so I can't really cast judgment on it. So I'm afraid I have no idea what I think about Elder Scrolls Blades. Good luck to them, I say. I've heard fairly good things from other people. John, do you have a loose end in a Fallout game you desperately want tied up? Yes, actually, I'd love to know what happened to the Legion after the events of New Vegas, assuming whatever the canonical ending is, that it involved the Legion losing, but Caesar not dying, given that takes quite a bit of work to make happen. I'm going to assume that, yeah, the Legion lost, but Caesar survived. but it's repeatedly made clear that without Caesar, the legion disintegrates. So what happens when Caesar gets older and sicker and it becomes increasingly obvious to everyone around him that he's not improving and in fact he's on his way out? What do the various different senior figures inside the Legion do to try and secure power for themselves, or at least secure security for themselves by breaking off a bit of the Legion that's going to be there by the Legion? What does Linnaeus actually do? Because we don't really know much about him. Like, you can make him the leader of the Legion by murdering Caesar, but in the event that Caesar is just dying of natural causes, does Linnaeus actually want to lead the Legion? Does he ever make a play? Does Vulpes Inculta outsmart him somehow and get rid of him? I think the disintegration of the Legion is very, very interesting indeed. Especially if, say, Ulysses or Joshua Graham decided to return to be involved in that process somehow or other. So I feel like, yeah, what happened to the Legion next could have been a very, very interesting story. So I hope we do get another Fallout set on the West Coast at some point that actually investigates some of that. John, could you explain how Brexit feels using the names of people and locations from the classical era? I'm not sure if this is really a fair analogy, but one thing did immediately come to mind, which is towards the end of the period where Athens was the dominant power in the Aegean, some people showed up in Athens from Sicily and basically told Athens, hey, you guys should actually invade Sicily and take Syracuse, because there's going to be gold for everybody, riches, it's going to be super easy, you're just going to march over there, take it, and we'll all be flipping rich. And all of that turned out to be a lie. Athens went over to Sicily, and basically it was one of the worst military catastrophes in the entire Hellenic era, because, yeah, they only went there on the basis of lies. A lot of lies. So maybe that's a slightly dramatic interpretation, but it's the one that immediately came to mind, yes. Do you pick which end card runs after a video, or is that YouTube sorcery? No, actually, that's going to be mostly selected by Claire, because very often Claire will do the editing and she'll be the one who picks the end card, so she'll actually put the most relevant end card she can think of at the end of a video, or if I'm editing it, I'll put the end card on, though occasionally I will swap out an end card that Claire has picked for a different one, though speaking of which, we really need more end cards, I just need to make some more end cards, damn it. Ah yes, and picking up on Star Wars that we were discussing earlier, yeah, a new recommendation, X-Wing TIE Fighter series. Isn't that like one of the really, really, really old ones? Does that even run on modern computers? Right, we'll need to look into that. And a rather charming sort of question here. Baba is you. John is recovered? Yes, I feel much better. I had to lie down afterwards. I'm good now. Are there any games you enjoy playing but will never make a video on because you know they won't get good views on the channel? Not really, to be honest. I'm kind of lucky, which is the games I enjoy playing over and over again are games that actually seem to go down really well on the channel too. So, you know, in particular, Total War and Fallout, which always do very, very well indeed. So, yeah, I'm very fortunate in that regard. Why'd you go for 40 to 50 minute YouTube videos and not split that up into 3 10 to 15 minute parts like other YouTubers do? Because while I might be able to get more views doing that, I might well get a lot less view time per video. And I think that YouTube really, really, really likes videos that have high view time, which is why we do really well in the YouTube rankings. Like our big Fallout 3 mega video is like the #1 video in the world for Fallout 3. Even though it doesn't necessarily have the most views, it's got the most watch minutes because it's so much longer than the competition, and YouTube really likes that thing. So long videos are a very good way of ranking well in YouTube. YouTube seems to like it, so I generally stick to that for that reason. How hyped are you for the new Avengers film? Oh, so hyped. Not sure if there's going to be a video discussing it or not, but yeah, Claire and I are pretty damn hyped for it. Does a playthrough of Mass Effect 3 also exist, or will it ever? Possibly. I'm not sure whether it'll be a full playthrough, but at the bare minimum, at some point, I will do a video essay, Mass Effect 3 is better than you think. I don't know when, no promises, but I do want to make that because I think it gets a lot more criticism than it deserves. John, I'm currently in Athens on the hill where the assembly met and totally not pretending to be Pericles. What's your opinion on Athenian democracy? My opinion on Athenian democracy, which was a form of direct democracy where people basically vote on everything, so everything was a referendum to whoever bothered to show up that day, is that it's the best possible argument for parliamentary or representative democracy. Athenian democracy was a mess that did awful things, like in moments of anger, issuing appalling orders against populations that didn't really deserve it. They made bad decisions, they made short-term decisions, they made inconsistent decisions. Yeah, Athenian democracy, as fascinating a political experiment as it is a fantastic argument for representative democracy. Why do you keep saying armor condition in Fallout 2? It's armor class. Yeah, sorry about that, that's just me making a mistake. John, I work on an IT security team and we're trying to think up a good name for ourselves. Do you have any ideas from your classical background that might help make a good name? We thought of something like the Praetorians, but it's not really that imaginative or obscure enough. I was struggling to think of something really. The only one I could really think of is ekphrasis, which I don't know whether you think sounds cool or not, but it doesn't actually refer specifically to defense or whatever. What it is it's like a thing in literature where you describe something in great detail. The reason I bring it up is because I believe the earliest example we have of it in literally all of literature is in the Iliad, where there is a passage of this to describe the shield of Achilles that's just actually been created by Hephaestus. So it's basically describing this wonderful, incredible, beautiful shield. So, I don't know, sorry, I probably would have gone for the Praetorians too. John, when you were working in non-MATN, John, and started to do videos, how were you able to balance the two? I know you've talked about being a workaholic and doing it all at once. Do you have any tricks to at least fake balance? No, none whatsoever, and don't ask me for advice about that, because I was terrible at it. Like, that was the closest I've ever been in my life to burnout. Like, it got to the stage where members of my own family effectively staged, like, mini interventions where they told me I looked exhausted and they were worried for my health. That was the moment where I had to actually choose to either give up a job and just do YouTube, or give up YouTube and just do the job, or like, massively reduce the amount of YouTube, and I went for the YouTube in the end. But no, I didn't have any healthy way to balance the two. I just tried to go full steam ahead on both of them simultaneously, and it was almost certainly detrimental to my health. So I have no good tips on that whatsoever, because I was terrible at it. Basically, just don't do what I tried to do. And one person mentioning the schedule and asking if maybe there's any chance that Rome Total War or Fallout 2 could get more slots a week. Now, I think 3 slots a week would be way too much for Rome Total War Barbarian Invasion, especially as the episodes tend to be about an hour, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. Like, 3 hours a week is a lot for some people to keep up with. That would just lead to more people falling out of the series. Fallout 2 is an interesting one, because in theory there probably could be 2 episodes of that a week, but those have been really long. Like, I think the average length of a Fallout 2 episode is nearly an hour and a half, so I feel like actually that would not be a good idea either, because again, that would probably be up to like 2.5, 3 hours a week. I think you get a lot of Fallout 2 a week, it's in one really long part, so you can choose to split it up if you want to. And the thing is, if I were to do more parts of the existing series, there would be less space for other stuff. I feel like right now, where 3 of the videos a week are series, and then we've also got 1 live stream, and then we've got a bunch of one-offs, that's a good balance so everybody gets something they like. If more slots were taken up by the series, if you're not into that series, there's less stuff available to you. So I feel like the balance is pretty good right now. Though that's not to say I wouldn't mind introducing another series at some point. I do have it in mind to potentially do a new series that could be another 2-time-a-week series that could go on Monday and Thursday. So on Monday it gets paired up with the live stream release from the previous weekend, and then on Thursday, that's just 2 series on that day. So on a Thursday, you'd get, one part of one series and then a part of Rome Total War, or whatever strategy series I'm doing at the time, therefore. And then there would still be one-offs on Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. So then we'd be looking at 4 one-offs a week, together with 3 series running simultaneously, Fallout once a week, and 2 on 2 a week. So that'd be slightly more than what we do right now. It's an interesting idea. I just need to figure out when the right time to start it is, because technically that would be adding a new video into the schedule, i.e. there'd be like more videos coming out per week than now. And we're a bit behind at the minute, so not just this moment, but that's vaguely what I would do if I were to introduce a 3rd series into the mix. And following up on that, have you ever played the Divide et Imperia mod for Rome 2? No, I've never modded Rome 2 at all, and honestly, I probably wouldn't be in a rush to do so, because they have recently added a whole bunch of new stuff into Rome 2 I haven't actually played. So, there's a bunch of new stuff in Rome 2 I haven't got around to experiencing yet. So, I can't imagine myself modding it purely because there's a bunch of stuff still being added to it for some reason. If Pokemon Sword and Shield get regional variants of Pokemon similar to Sun and Moon to bring them more in line with British theming, are there any you'd like to see? Yes, I'd like to see a British Execute where it's Eggs Benedict, where all 6 Execute faces are Benedict Cumberbatch. That's what I want in Pokemon Sword and Shield, I just want Eggs Benedict Cumberbatch. Question to Claire, how much of a dick is John to you outside of the channel? Oh dear, I'm not looking forward to this answer.
I've said this before on Patroncast, but I don't know why John is so worried that I'm going to say bad things about him. I like John, he is really lovely outside the channel. Now the question is, what consists outside the channel? Because obviously I have a job for the channel that takes 40 hours a week, and when I'm not on the clock and I'm doing other stuff, it's outside of the channel for me, but it's not necessarily outside of the channel for John. It's very, very often not outside of the channel for John because he is working on the channel pretty much all the time. And so sometimes John is like focused on working and on the channel when I'm not. And there can be a little bit of a disconnect there where I'm, wanting to talk to him about something not the channel and he's just not listening because he's focused on his work. But to be honest, if I'm editing one of my own videos or podcasts or whatever and like working on my own stuff and I'm busy and he comes in to like talk to the cat or he wants to show me something on the internet or whatever, like I will get frustrated and snappy too. It's just that kind of stuff doesn't go on the channel. So I think we're both people who like to focus very strongly on what we're doing in the moment. Also, we have a relationship where we like to take the piss out of each other. So both of these things kind of go together to make it sound, I think, a lot worse than it is when we're live streaming. But I like John. He's very nice. He's very thoughtful. You shouldn't be dating somebody for 11 years who's not nice to you.
John, I was watching your Rome Total War videos and I noticed something rather odd. Namely that the game uses the dating system BC, and I don't think the Romans used the BC dating system. Indeed they did not. Romans tracked time from the foundation of Rome, ab urbe condita. Now unfortunately, they didn't know exactly when Rome was founded, because it's all just floating around in myth a little bit. So their calendar basically begins somewhere around the 7th, 8th century BC, and they just basically start counting from there. Also, you said before that Latin is a dead language, so we can't be certain how to pronounce it, but it's still the main language of the Catholic Church. Indeed it is, but time has a wicked way with languages, which means just because Catholic Latin is pronounced a particular way today, that doesn't mean that's how the Romans were pronouncing it millennia ago. Things have shifted over time, so we can't really use what's currently going on in Catholicism to help us understand exactly how certain things would have been pronounced for certain back in the Roman era. Hello, John and Editing Claire. What are your favourite game shows? Ooh, interesting. So, I have a particular fondness for the particularly naff old game shows of the 90s that I used to watch on like Saturday night TV when I was a kid. Things like Big Break, The Generation Game, Bullseye, all of that good stuff. Oh, I love that business. And now I've said that, I'll pass you over to Claire, who can tell you all about Fort Boyard.
It's so funny to me that John is directly going to Fort Boyard as an answer for me, because yeah, I used to watch that when I was a kid, but like, that's not what I watch now, that's not what I thought of when I heard your question. So to answer for now, the game shows that I like to watch when I'm just like hanging around the house or whatever are Pointless and Only Connect mostly, and John and I watch Only Connect together a bit when we're having dinner or whatever. But I guess since John mentioned Fort Boyard and it is ridiculous and hilarious way, I will also tell you about Fort Boyard, which is a game show that was on French TV when I was a kid that is set on like this old prison fort on an island in the Atlantic. And I guess the closest thing I could compare it to on British TV would be the Crystal Maze, but it was a lot more like straightforward with its like medieval theming. It was a lot less bonkers than the Crystal Maze, and you know, when I'm looking back at both of them, I think the Crystal Maze is a lot more fun.
John, I just found a wonderful dating sim and thought of you. It's called National Park Girls, where you delve into a mystery while dating anthropomorphic personifications of the United States national parks. I wasn't sure whether this was a joke, so I had to look this up before I actually answered this question. And it's actually real. That's actually a real flipping thing. So, okay, I'll add it to the shortlist for Valentine's Day next year. John, have you read His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman? And if so, what do you think of it? I have, but it was a very long time ago. I haven't actually done a reread of that in, I don't know, well over a decade. So I'm not really in a good position to talk about the nuances of my understanding and appreciation of the book. One thing I did get to see is there was a stage of that in Britain. That must have been about probably just over a decade ago. So probably I have actually seen that more recently than I've read the books, because I was actually able to go and see that, which was lovely. That was the version that had Timothy Dalton playing Lord Asriel, though I didn't actually see it on a night when Timothy Dalton was present. Someone else was actually playing Lord Asriel that night. Really good performance, by the way, mainly memorable for the amazing puppeteering work that was actually done to bring the demons to life on stage. Well worth just kind of looking up some images or video of that if you can find it, just because, yeah, the amazing work with the puppeteers actually doing all of that work. That was great. That was just really, really damn cool. And also to both of you, what is your favourite literary joke? Okay, that's an interesting question. I've always had a fondness for some of the humour in Homer's Iliad. I'm not sure whether you'd call this a literary joke necessarily, but I've always quite liked it, which is obviously at the beginning of the Iliad, the inciting incident that drives the entire plot is Achilles gets really annoyed and withdraws from battle. But simultaneously, this one isn't actually discussed as much. When Achilles' mother, Thetis, goes up to Zeus and says, hey, help out Achilles, Hera gets really annoyed and she also withdraws. At that point, she basically just withdraws from the rest of the gods because she's just really annoyed with Zeus. But I think it's kind of a little bit of dark comedy in the text that those two things happen simultaneously, but the Hera situation is sorted out immediately. Hephaestus just basically comes along, gives everyone some wine, everything's sorted out, everything's back to normal, whereas the consequences of Achilles withdrawing from battle will continue to play out through the entire Iliad, and a whole bunch of people will end up dead. So it's kind of funny in a way, because the gods are doing the same thing that Achilles is doing. These two things happen on Earth and at Olympus at the same time. But it's also kind of tragic in its own way too, which is what I think elevates the joke. Because, yeah, when things go wrong for the divine, it's really easy to sort out without any lasting consequence and everything gets put right in no time at all. But for humanity, yeah, things work out a whole lot worse. So I'm going to say that. Over to Claire at this point.
I'd have to say all of the fake Latin phrases and mottos in the Discworld books by Terry Pratchett. I especially love the motto of the Ankh-Morpork City Watch, which reads, I suppose, Fabricati Diem Punk is supposed to stand for Make My Day Punk, which I think is pretty funny.
Have you ever read anything by James O'Donnell, most famous for the book Pagans, about Roman religion? No, actually, I haven't. To be honest, when I studied classics, I was mainly focusing on the Hellenic side. I was way more into Greek culture and Greek literature than Roman stuff. The Roman stuff I'm more familiar with is late Republican and early Imperial. Just because the Roman era is so flipping long, you won't find many people who have specialised in, like, all of it. Generally, people will be experts at little bits of it. So, late Republican and early Imperial for Rome is my specialisation, and 5th century BC for Hellenic culture and history. Those kind of where my actual real interest lies. So, I'm afraid I've never actually had occasion to read his work. I've noticed that you occasionally break into song, especially during live streams. Throughout the years, the tune is always the same. Where does it come from and what is it a reference to? I don't know. I mean, I assume you're referring to the kind of the vague tune. Da 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 da. I don't know what it's from. I've just been doing it for so many years. I've no idea what it's from. So if you happen to recognise that tune and can tell me what it's from, please do let me know, because I have no idea. What's the most British thing that could be added into Pokemon Sword and Shield? Some form of tea Pokemon, where like the little mini cute one is called like Cuppa, and it's just like a little cup that just kind of hops around, and probably it's like a, I don't know, like a stone water type or something, maybe a steel water type? No, it shouldn't be a steel water type. Like, what's ceramic? Ceramic's like vaguely based on like clay, which is sort of a stone water? Maybe stone water. I'm not sure. And then that like evolves into a bigger, chunkier mug Pokemon. And then finally the final evolved form is a big angry teapot. That would be spot on right there. Are you thinking it's all about Fallout 76 You Only Live Once after Fallout 4 You Only Live Once is complete? Honestly, no, I don't think there's enough replayability in Fallout 76 right now. 76 is going to take some very, very major updates for me to consider making a new series that's like a full playthrough. Right now, what they're adding in is quite small stuff, which is why I'm just doing the odd one-off, but I don't foresee another full Fallout 76 series, no. John, I saw you mention that the Rome Total War is Broken video was inspired by the Spiffing Brit, and was wondering whether you'd be interested in making a collab with him. Yeah, absolutely. I don't actually know what the right game for that would be, but I do have one thing in mind that I'm not going to say, because it would be a bit of a spoiler. I do have something in mind. I have been meaning to propose to him, so we'll see about that, we'll see. How do you like your eggs cooked? Scrambled. I really like scrambled, or I like omelette. So, scrambled eggs on toast with a bunch of ketchup is marvellous. A really nice omelette is good too. Those are my two favourites. John, the first thing I did when I saw you were doing Fallout 2 was watch your series on Fallout 1. I was wondering whether many others did the same thing, and whether that series has seen a viewer boost in the last few weeks. It has, but not a huge one. Like, typically before I began Fallout 2, yeah, the Fallout 1 series was getting... yeah, it looks like about 700 views a week in terms of new views on just the first episode. I'm not wrapping up all the episodes, that's just episode 1. But yeah, after I did Fallout 2, that jumped to about 3,000 views in that week, and then 2,000 views the week after. And now it's settling down a bit, but it's still higher than it was beforehand. So yeah, there has been a boost. Not a huge one, but definitely it's there. John, will there be an Imperator Rome series? Because if so, I'll weep tears of happiness. Oh, of course. Absolutely. And I'm hoping, because yeah, Barbarian Invasion isn't the longest DLC in the world, it might end just the right time for Imperator Rome to take over, because that's coming out in... I can't remember exactly what its date is, but it's coming out hopefully at roughly the right time for one to flow into the other. So yeah, 100% absolutely that will happen. The next question is basically a series of fights for me to adjudicate on. Okay, so if we had a tournament where the semi-finals were Caesar's Legion versus the Boomers, and then the Enclave versus the Railroad. Right, Caesar's Legion versus the Boomers. I've got to give that to the Boomers, because Caesar's Legion is overwhelmingly staffed with melee fighters, and you can be as tough a melee fighter as you want. When you're going up against artillery and a giant pile of ammunition, you're gonna be flipping screwed. So I've got to give that one to the Boomers. And then there's the Enclave versus the Railroad. And I've got to give that one to the Enclave, really, just because, if nothing else, they've got the manpower. Even if the Railroad would be able to sabotage and bring down some of the Enclave installations, in the end, the Enclave would win just through technological superiority and numerical superiority. There's no chance the Railroad win that one in the long run. And then we've got the Enclave versus the Boomers, which I've got to give to the Enclave, because even though the Boomers have artillery, the Enclave have got air support. Now, the Boomers do too, but they've got a single bomber. The Enclave, meanwhile, have a whole bunch of vertibirds that they can actually use for air-to-air combat. So I feel like they'd be able to take down the bombers sooner or later, and then they can just knock out the artillery by approaching from the air, and then they can just move in with power armor, and once the artillery is removed, the Boomers are done. So ultimately, I'm guessing the Enclave needs to win that one. What happened to the return of the Obra Dinn video you mentioned back in January? It just never got made. Hopefully I will get to that at some point, because since then, I think it very recently just won a pair of BAFTAs, if I recall correctly. So, yeah, I do need to get round to that. I just don't know exactly when. Is there a place and time you'd like to see covered by the Total War games that currently isn't? I've said it before and I'll say it again. I would love to see a total World War I. I'd love to see a take on trench warfare, and a campaign where, say, each turn was only a week, so we could actually have the war being a massive thing that would last for, like, the entire game. So some powers are basically in a permanent slow state of war, but there's lots of fronts opening up. Maybe if you wanted to, you could make it a bit bigger. You could kind of say, okay, say 1910 through to 1950, and actually have the possibility for World War I and World War II to come in. I just think it would be interesting, because the technology of warfare advanced so much during that period. Seeing that stuff coming in would be very, very interesting indeed. We've never had trench warfare at all during Total War. It was one of the last times we saw cavalry playing a major role in a real-world conflict, because that didn't really go so well in the place of machine guns and whatever. I think it would just be interesting and different. I don't know how it would work, but I'd love to see it being tried. A suggestion next for 007 Everything or Nothing by the same people as Agent Under Fire. Oh, Agent Under Fire. I love Agent Under Fire. It's a flawed little gem. There's so much wrong with it, but I love it anyway. That's worth having a think about, though. In all fairness, I did a little mini-series on Nightfire not so long ago, and that didn't really do so well in the views, so I'll have to have a think about that. More likely it will be a one-off, actually. Also, this one's fascinating to me. I was rewatching Dan's E3 from 2016, and that was the year Nuka World was announced. During the EA section where you were a guest, you explicitly mentioned Nuka World, despite the fact to my knowledge it hadn't been announced yet. Am I right in thinking there was a slight mess up there? I don't recall. Did I accidentally break an embargo in 2016? I don't know. If I remember correctly, I didn't know about Nuka World ahead of time. I don't think I had any information ahead of that being announced. So I don't know if there's just some weirdness about what was announced when, or if you're misremembering dates, or I'm misremembering dates, or if some of that was post-recorded or edited together later or something. I'm genuinely not sure. I don't remember the discussion you're referring to, but if I recall correctly, I did not have any insider information from Bethesda about what the different DLCs were going to be, but if I'm just misremembering and I did, yes, I may have accidentally broken embargo during a live stream, so sorry if so. What's the one thing you wish you could do on the channel but resources, commitment and influence aren't there yet? Collabs, games, IRL videos, whatever. What's your most ludicrous channel related pipe dream? I would love to do a little animated series where a bunch of old video game consoles argue with each other while they're slowly gathering dust. There'd be like N64 and GameCube and Xbox 360, and they'd just be chilling out together on a shelf, slowly gathering dust, never being played anymore, and it would just be them discussing things and arguing and just kind of living their life day to day, getting used to the fact that they're never going to be played again. And like, you know, there could be a really recent console that's only just been retired that's getting used to it, and the older consoles that have been retired for decades giving him advice on how to cope. I'd love to do that. I'd really love to do that, but that would need animators and me to have actually produced the scripts and voice actors and all that good stuff. I would love to do that. I've been meaning to do that for such a long time, and I have actually written some of the scripts in part. I would really dearly love to do that at some point. I just don't know if I'm ever going to actually get it done. John, will you ever do another end card production live stream? Probably not, if only because it turned out to be horrendously inefficient. Like, I think we spent like 4 or 5 hours producing a single end card, so that was not a good productive use of time. Although I do need to make some more end cards, but I'll probably just do it quietly by myself, just because the live stream format really slowed that down. Also, are you ever going to play any of the expansions to Medieval 2 Total War? Yes, absolutely, because there's 4 really great campaigns in the Medieval 2 Kingdoms expansion, so 100% at least one of them will happen at some point, yes. If you hadn't studied classics, what do you think you would have actually ended up studying? Probably maths. At the point where I basically decided to focus my GCSEs and then A-levels on kind of working towards going to university to study classics, I was also very, very good at maths, to the extent that when I actually put my choices in for my GCSEs, the head of maths at my school basically came and hunted me down and challenged me as to why I hadn't put down maths and further maths, because he basically thought I really should have done that. Like, I was basically a shoo-in to potentially go to a good university and study mathematics, if that's what I'd wanted to do. But it wasn't what I wanted to do, so if it hadn't been classics, it would probably have been maths, because I was really damn good at that back in the day. And in terms of other periods of history, though I'm not sure whether this is actually cheating, because this isn't really classics, it's not really in the classical era, I probably would have studied prehistory. Like, I have a real fascination with the Bronze Age civilizations. I flipping love the Bronze Age civilizations. I love the Minoans and the Mycenaeans and all of that, and okay, fine, that probably falls under classics anyway, but it's not technically part of the classical era. That's a bit too late for that business. So, yeah, I'm going to say, like, the prehistory of the Bronze Age. Flippin' love that era. Any updates on the Promised Pokemon playthrough? Promised is a bit of a harsh word. I wouldn't have used the word promise, personally. No. In short, no. I haven't even figured out how exactly I'm going to record it yet. Like, when Sword and Shield come out, I will 100% do that. I don't know if I'll have the chance to, like, squeeze in something before that point. I'll need to figure out how to actually record them, because, like, say, DS games are really notoriously difficult to record, so I'd need to figure out how to do it. Will the Fallout 3 end card you made in the Christmas end card livestream ever be used? Oh, it is used occasionally, but you're right, I probably overused the Frost one, because I like it just a little bit better, so I should just bring out the kill everything one a bit more often. You are right there. John, long-time fan, first-time commenter. I love the Fallout 76 series, but I felt it left some questions unanswered. Is there a chance we'll get a deeper dive into the game once Bethesda cleans it up to make it a bit more workable? If you mean lore-wise, that kind of varies. because there's plenty of stuff in the game that, as far as I can tell, and I did actually go looking into this, some of it just doesn't really go anywhere. Like, there's just like little hints or references to stories that don't actually have any payoff in the game, to be honest. So it might be fun at some point to do like a one-off, looking at the bits of lore that do actually go somewhere. But yeah, right now there's plenty of stuff that just doesn't really go anywhere. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff about the closed vaults, but obviously that doesn't go anywhere yet because at some point they're going to open the vault. There's a bunch of like individual little houses that look like there kind of should be a story attached to them, but there just sort of isn't. So I mean, I guess there was some stuff pertaining to, yeah, the mining companies and Ultrasight I didn't cover, because in the series I didn't realise you could go up into that tower and check out the headquarters, but honestly there's not a huge amount in there. I have actually been there off screen since. It's just, yeah, there was animal experimentation, they were bad people, they were trying to sell it to the military. So yeah, I'm not really 100% sure there's much more than what I've covered, just because plenty of stuff just doesn't go anywhere at all. But if it is mopped up, and if it does actually improve over time, I might be willing to go back and do a little bit of a deep dive into some of the lore, sure. With a new Bloodlines game on the way, any plans to do Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines? Oh yeah. That will 100% happen as a series before the new one comes out. But that is still some distance in the future, so I'm not in a rush to get to it. John, if you were a Crusader Kings character, what would you be like? Ooh, interesting. Okay, how are we going to do this? I won't give exact numbers, but I'm going to say probably learning would be my highest stat. Okay. Then, ooh, interesting. Okay, diplomacy or probably diplomacy next. Then stewardship would be decent enough, and intrigue and martial would both be quite on the low side. Martial especially. Martial could be like 0. I'm not a good war leader, I think. And I think I had a thrift-focused education when I was young, because that can lead to the traits curious and fussy, which I think describe me quite well. And in terms of traits, if I've got one trait I'm really proud of, I'd probably say I've got like the scholar trait. Because, you know, I did have a fairly good education. And then, in terms of like the virtues, I'll go for diligent. I think I'm fairly diligent. So that's sort of a character, I'd say. In short, the sort of character I find quite admirable, but one you would never, ever, ever want to be king, because they can't lead a bloody army under any circumstances. Alright, fuck, marry, kill. El Presidente of Tropico, the Queen of England, and Claire, but she has Hitler's face. But it's still actually Claire, she just looks like Hitler, and even then, only the face. So okay, marry Claire because she's still Claire, and then fuck the Queen of England because that's just a really good story you can just tell at the pub for the rest of your life, so therefore kill El Presidente of Tropico just because he or she is left over at this point. John, if your favourite incarnations of the Lone Wanderer, the Courier and the Soul Survivor were all to team up in a Day of the Doctor style crossover, what would be the result? Well, I think the result would be team up has to be in inverted commas, because Evil John and Bacon would immediately both try and kill PD Shoot. I think PD Shoot would just about survive by retreating for the time being. Evil John would then kill Bacon and then attempt to finish off PD Shoot, but PD Shoot would survive with a single hit point. So it wouldn't exactly work out well for anybody, really. John, not sure if you're a big fan of Star Trek or not. I do rather enjoy The Next Generation. That's my favourite series right there. But if you are, have you ever thought about trying the mod for Stellaris, New Horizons? Not really. I've never really found much of a reason to mod Stellaris, just because they keep adding more and more and more stuff into it anyway. There's free updates, there's changes, there's new expansion packs coming in all the time, so honestly, I've just never really seen a need to mod Stellaris because there's plenty of new stuff arriving for it constantly anyway. John, any highlights for games or videos coming out over the next few months? Ooh, let's have a little bit of a look-see there. Alright, what do we have going on here? I want to finally get round to Factorio and RimWorld, as I mentioned previously. Total War Warhammer 2 is finally gaining the Prophet and the Warlock DLC, so that actually provides some really nice additions to Skaven, and I do love playing as Skaven, so we'll be giving that one a look-see as well. Imperator Rome will be coming out at some point in like a month or something. Life is Strange 2 gains its 3rd episode, so naturally that will be a live stream, I would say. And, oh yes, of course, Total War 3 Kingdoms will finally be coming out too. That's been delayed, but that's looking better and better and better. It feels like that delay was a very good idea. They've been making some very positive changes there, so we'll be looking at that at some point as well. And after that, we start getting slightly too far into the future, so sadly I do not actually know what's going on at that point. And a book recommendation for Claire, The Lies of Locke Lamora. You can think of it as a mix of Ocean's 11 and Game of Thrones. Fascinating. John, have you ever considered revisiting Halcyon 6? It received a major update since you last played it, to the point where there's even a new edition out. I might do, but no offense, it was a fairly small game that never really set the world on fire, and I have already done one video on it, so I'm not 100% sure that will happen, to be honest. John, thanks for doing the Barbarian Invasion playthrough. Could you recommend any good books about Rome in that historical period? Myself, I would struggle to, because as I was saying earlier, it's not really my area of expertise. I only know the really high-level details of that. I never studied it in great detail. But thanks to the earlier question on the topic of religion in that era, and the question of Christianity and paganism around Rome, I can recommend James O'Donnell's Pagans. Thank you, previous question. If you could travel back in time and witness or participate in one historical event, what event or time would that be? Okay, I'm going to cheat and just kind of skip around a little bit, because one of my favourite ancient empires is the Minoan Empire, that were basically at the height of their power about 2000 BC, and were pretty much all wrapped up about 1300 BC, and we've no idea what finished them off. Invasion, natural disaster, economic collapse, we just don't flipping know, and I've always considered that incredibly sad. So I'd just like to basically take the time machine and just nip around Crete between about 1500 BC and 1200 BC, and just kind of stop every few years and just ask everyone, hey, how's it going? Any natural disasters or invasions recently? You guys feeling okay? Great, I'll just be on my way in that case, because I just really like to know what bloody happened to the Minoans, because we just don't know. John, music-related question. I'm not sure if this is a theoretical question or actually a practical one. A band are having a 20th anniversary tour of their first album. Unfortunately, the lead singer died in 2014, so the band have a stand-in who is a touring vocalist in what is essentially the death mask of the former singer, and he's not being revealed. Is this a fitting tribute to a loved band founder, or maybe a bit too much? I don't really know. I mean, I think probably if, like, the rest of the band and the management and, in particular, I suppose, the family of the lead singer were all okay with it, then go ahead. I suppose that would be a nice tribute. But if, say, the family were opposed, I'd say probably don't do it in that case. But again, I'm not sure whether this is actually a request for real advice or if this is a theoretical situation. John, do you think the roadmap and update for Fallout 76 represents the direction that Bethesda are trying to take any new Fallout game to come? Or is this just them trying to fix the mess of Fallout 76 and instantly creating more mess? I think this is a bit more cock-up than conspiracy, to be honest. I think, if anything, the reaction to Fallout 76 and the ongoing reaction is probably going to make Fallout 5 a better game. Because now, when they do announce Fallout 5, they're going to basically have no choice but to very, very, very much focus on how, hey, it's more RPG, it's really single player, we brought back all of the dialogue options, and that's just like how you liked it back in Fallout 3 and New Vegas, and there's loads of things you can speak and ask about, and it's all RPGs, you can character build, and diddly diddly dee. I suspect they're now going to have no choice but to do that when they announce Fallout 5, so this could all work out in the end. As for Fallout 76, I suspect what they're doing is they're following a roadmap that they actually had in mind for a long time. Like, I suspect things like survival mode being pure PvP, they knew they wanted it to be like that from, like, you know, before the game even launched. So the response to the game since hasn't affected that whatsoever. I suspect this was all planned out a long time ago. I've got no evidence for that. That's just my gut feeling looking at it, because sometimes it feels a bit on the tone deaf side. Or maybe that's just, you know, my understanding of the game, because to me it just feels like survival mode's a step in the wrong direction. We need to find ways to make players have meaningful positive interactions, not just shoot each other and avoid each other as much as possible. John, if and when you get round to Witcher 2 and 3, would you consider doing full playthroughs of them? I would consider it, but I don't promise these things ahead of time, because I'm not going to do a full series for a game I personally don't love or enjoy. So I can't really give you a definitive answer there. Like, if people don't enjoy the series, if it doesn't really just kind of do that well at all in the views, people would clearly rather be watching something else. I know Witcher 3 in particular is a very, very, very long game, so if people just aren't into it, then I can't promise it's just going to stick around just because it's The Witcher 3 and it's well regarded. And in terms of, yeah, full series in general, again, depends. If I like it and you guys like it, it's a possibility, but I promise nothing ahead of time. The second part of the same question, would you consider actually at least reading summaries of the books before doing that? It really changes how you approach and see the games. I've got no reason to not check out the summaries of the books, but honestly, that principle kind of annoys me in a way, because if you're making a game, the information that you need to understand the story of the game should be in the game. There shouldn't be, like, major things that change your understanding and context of characters and events inside external media that would totally change how you respond to the game. Like, if there's information about the universe that's so significant it would make you reevaluate how you view the game and its core characters, that information should be in the game. It shouldn't be locked away in the books. It should somehow be inserted into the game, even if it's just like, you know, a character in a bar who you can speak to if you choose to, who could give you that information, so it's available to players. So kind of bugs me a little bit conceptually that apparently there's a bunch of really important information that changes your understanding of the game that's not in the game, but yeah, I guess I'll look up a summary at the absolute bare minimum before I get back to it whenever I do. John, if someone was to give you an all-expenses-paid week-long holiday to any of the modern-day locations in the Fallout video games, which would you choose and why? So, yeah, we've got various bits of rural California, we've got Washington, D.C., we've got Las Vegas, we've got Boston and that area. Probably Las Vegas, just because I've never been. It sounds like quite an experience. So sure, I'll go for Las Vegas, because when you say all expenses paid, I assume that means you're covering my gambling debts as well. If Claire called you and said she needed help disposing of a body, what would you assume has happened? I'd assume Claire finally got round to trying to learn how to drive, and I wouldn't actually be that surprised. John, when will we see a full Nintendo series on the channel? I do not know. At the absolute latest, when the new Pokemon comes out on Switch, yes, that will exist on the channel. So that might be the first full series. I don't know if we might get one in before that point. There are a few things I'd like to get to, especially kind of like, you know, retro GameCube stuff. But whether it'll happen before Pokemon Salt and Pepper, I don't know. John, I'd love to see you play Sekiro. Honestly, I wouldn't love to see me play Sekiro. Just Souls-likes aren't my sort of thing. They just don't really appeal to me. I don't like the idea of a game that's incredibly difficult, that's about you being repeatedly punched in the face 1,000 times until you finally memorize a pattern so perfectly you can avoid all the boss's attacks and then win. It just doesn't appeal to me. That sort of like oppressive lose again 1,000 times till you finally get good enough to beat the boss. That sort of thing just doesn't appeal. It's not my thing, which is why I didn't really play Sekiro, to be honest. So maybe at one point I'll do a one-off, but that sort of thing just doesn't appeal to me, to be honest. I kind of file it away in my brain in the same space as bullet hell shooters, which also are not my thing. Will we see Far Cry 5 or maybe New Dawn? Honestly, probably not, just because they weren't particularly exciting to me. Like, Far Cry New Dawn was a very well put together Far Cry game. It was also very similar to Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4, and I've just got a little bit burnt out on the format, to be honest. It's just been doing the same thing over and over again for a very long period of time, and absolutely, they've polished it, so it's a really smooth, good experience at this point, but it's still the same experience we've been having for like over a decade or something. I just want them to do something new with the franchise, so I don't foresee a full series until the franchise has had a bit of a freshen up with a whole bunch of new stuff added, which is definitely not the case in New Dawn. John and Claire, what's your favourite type of cheese? I don't really have a favourite type of cheese. Just give me some nice medium cheddar and I'm fine. But let's go over to Claire for that, because she'll probably have a better answer.
First up, I want to say that I think it's very cruel of you to make me pick a favourite amongst my children. But if I do have to pick something, I would say the cheese that I miss the most from France, because it's quite difficult to get a hold of in London. Like, you can, but it's expensive, is a cheese that is from like the area that my parents live in now. It's called Pélardon, and it's like a fairly strong but creamy goat's cheese that I really enjoy.
John, pick your remaster for 2019. Arena, Daggerfall, Redguard, Morrowind, Oblivion. I guess I'd probably go for Oblivion, just because that's the one I wouldn't actually mind playing next, just so I can kind of go backwards chronologically step by step. But I'd also like to say Daggerfall, because that was the ridiculously big one. That was the one that basically covered all of Tamriel, and is technically the biggest of all the Elder Scrolls, so that would be one hell of a remaster project right there. John, what's your most hoped for feature in Elder Scrolls 6 and which feature of Skyrim do you hope is scrapped? I hope there's less kind of semi-procedurally generated quests where character is missing item. Item is assigned to any of a number of locations dotted around here, so therefore, because it could be anywhere, there can't be much in the way of environmental storytelling or detail. Instead, you're just going into cave with bandits who must be killed, snuck around, converted to your side, whatever. Then you pick up sword and take it back to man. I hope there's a lot more narrative context to a lot of the quest giving. That's the big thing for me. I want more narrative context to what I'm doing. John, could you recommend a handful of your favourite board games that could be played with just 2 or 3 people? I love Galaxy Trucker, probably better with 3 than 2 there. 13 Days is a Cold War game about politics and not blowing up the world, or probably accidentally blowing up the world actually, but trying not to blow up the world, which is really, really interesting. I think that's actually made for just 2 players. I'm not sure that does actually have a 3-player mode. And Race for the Galaxy is a card game about building a sci-fi empire that, yeah, definitely works with 2 players, but again, might be slightly better with 3. John, would you agree that the newer games in the Total War franchise don't necessarily cater to your unique brand of emergent storytelling so much? I think that's probably a fairly good observation there. Part of the reason why maybe the newer Total War games don't go down quite so well is because the old Total War games, for the most part, you just basically had a world map, characters that picked up a bunch of traits, and then you just basically made your own stories up as you went around the map. Newer Total War games seem to be much more structured. The campaigns have very specific objectives in mind, like say the Vortex campaign in Warhammer 2 is a really good example of that, and that's a good campaign, but it's also a very, very, very structured campaign. And you get a lot more missions than you used to as well. So the game's kind of trying to make sure you have an action-packed time with a lot of stuff going on by just kind of throwing missions at you and choices and diddly-diddly-dee. And I preferred the older days when it was just, here's a world map, here's some people, go conquer some stuff. Because then you make up the stories by yourself, which I actually rather enjoy doing. But yeah, to answer the second part of the question, do the newer Total War games do better on the channel? No, they do much worse. The older Total War games do much better, which is why at some point I would like to look at Empire and Shogun 2 in particular, together with Rome 2 of course. So I'd like to look at all of those at some point, but I don't really have a time in mind. What would you do with an Infinity Gauntlet? I would just use the Reality Stone to make more resources so there's enough resources for everybody. Checkmate, Thanos. John, what in your opinion is the best ending to Fallout New Vegas, including the Independent Vegas ending? I would say NCR. For all of their problems, for all of the corruption, for all of the issues the NCR has clearly developed while it's expanded, probably expanded too fast in fact, I still say that is the best ending, because as compromised and flawed as it is, their society of laws and rules and civilization seems better than any option that's available. Are there any games that you remember fondly which just don't hold up at all? I wouldn't say it doesn't hold up at all, but I am one of the people who, if you'd asked me like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, what's the best video game of all time? I'd have said Zelda Ocarina of Time. And it's still got some really good bits. The dungeon design is still excellent, absolutely. But I don't think it's aged well out of some of the Zelda games. I would say that Majora's Mask and Wind Waker have both aged better than it. So, yeah, arguably, to some extent, not totally, but to some extent, Ocarina of Time. Any ideas how Article 13 and or Brexit will affect the future of the channel? None whatsoever, because severity of Brexit and implementation of Article 13 will massively affect that, so we just can't really speculate. At some point it might be necessary to rehome the channel to another country. We just don't know. We're keeping a close eye on it, but we just don't know how either of those things are going to work out. There's just too many questions still in the air on that one. Controversial opinion. I have recently tried Jaffa Cakes and chocolate digestives. I claim digestives are the better tasting snack. Thoughts? Interesting. I would actually probably agree with you. Because the thing about a Jaffa Cake is, I find it too easy to just pop a Jaffa Cake in your mouth and then it's just gone seconds later. Just like in, chew chew, swallow, done. That's the Jaffa Cake taken care of right there. A chocolate digestive you can savour and enjoy. In fact, the same's true even for a basic plain digestive. If you've got a really nice buttery one, you can, like, you know, slowly work your way through it. There's more of a snack there. I feel like it's more substantial to eat. So, yeah, honestly, I'd probably agree with you. John, how do you avoid flipping swearing in all of your flipping videos? I can barely make my breakfast toast without swearing a dozen times. You must be really bad at using a toaster. I don't know. I just like my channel to be like, accessible to people who want to watch with their kids or watch as a family group or whatever, which I know some people do. So, screw it. I just like keeping things, fairly family friendly and not swearing as far as we can. And when I do make adult jokes, I tend to make them as asides and throwaways. The sort of things that get added into kids' movies that only the grown-ups in the room will get. They just fly over the heads of the kids. So there's absolutely smutty, dirty jokes in my video, but I try never to make them the main joke. They're always the asides or the throwaways. So yeah, that's just kind of how I prefer to do things. John, what's more difficult for you? A casual blind playthrough or playing a game like Total War that you know back to front and love? Absolutely, it's the casual blind playthroughs because it's very difficult to figure out how to pace a video when I don't know what's coming. When I know the game really well, I can plan a really good video because I'll know, okay, so this video, this is likely to happen, this tech will come in, this city will happen, this siege that's coming out will probably be really epic and I know how I can shoot that. That's going to look really, really cool indeed. So that's really easy to make good videos out of. But when I don't know what's coming, it's hard for me to plan a really good video where a bunch of stuff happens because I like my videos to be varied. So there's story and action and me figuring stuff out in them. And if I don't know the game, that's really hard to do. So absolutely, it's way easier for me to do it with games I know and love. Also, and this is a deep philosophical question, between the two, what do you prefer? New versus old? I'm gonna say new, because as a general rule, progress is good, so new. Theoretically, if YouTube or whatever platform you might end up using in the future would allow nudity, would you still hedgehog up the occasional boob or genitalia you might encounter in games, or would you let it all hang loose? Yeah, screw it. If we actually were allowed to have nudity on YouTube, I'd just have nudity. Though I might just have the hedgehog occasionally show up just anyway, because I like censorship hedgehog. He's one of my favourite characters on the whole channel. John, since you live in the UK and you've been on the Co-optional podcast in the past, have you ever thought about going to CoxCon? Yes, in fact, I think I was invited for this coming up one this last year, and we just failed to ever actually get it properly sorted out. I'm not sure there was actually a reason for that. I think we just kind of both forgot to follow up with the other. But yes, I was sort of invited to this last one, but we just never actually got the diaries all kind of lined up correctly. So, as far as I'm aware, I'm not going to this next one. So I really hope I'm not on the guest list and they're not expecting me. That'd be very embarrassing if so. Good day, John. Are there any games out there you'd love to do a series on, but choose not to because you believe the viewership figures wouldn't be high enough to justify it? It's not specifically because of just that, but I do always worry if I ever did want to do a full series of Skies of Arcadia, which is one of my favourite games of all time. I'm not necessarily sure the views for that would be that high, because it's just a wonderful game in terms of the story it tells, but it's a fairly linear game for the most part. The actual gameplay is fairly simple, to be honest, in terms of combat. There's not a huge amount of strategic depth there. I'm just mainly in it for the atmosphere, the storytelling, the world building, the world it creates and how you explore it. But I don't know whether it would really get the views. But really the bit that worries me about Skies of Arcadia is the voice acting. Because there's a cast of 100 memorable characters. Some of them, of course, very big, some of them fairly small. But all of them are very distinctive and none of them actually have voices assigned to them because there's no voice acting in the game. So I'd basically need to voice act for a cast of characters that big, where I need to provide a somewhat distinctive voice for all of these characters, and lots of them interact with a whole bunch of other characters, because everyone's travelling around all the time, so all these different voices, I'd need to keep them straight in my head, and make sure I could kind of very easily slip from one to the other. It would be very difficult to do. John, hexagon-shaped MATN drinks coasters when? That's such a genius idea. Claire, write that down. The coasters should be hexagons. That'd be perfect. We should do that. Claire, make that happen. And 2 recommendations for Star Wars strategy games, Star Wars Rebellion and Star Wars Empire at War. I have been meaning to do a little mini-series at the bare minimum for Empire at War at some point. So, not imminently, but expect it in the not too distant future. Since April 1st was very recent, what pranks did you fall for? I admit I totally fell for the Amazon blimp. I thought that was real and I thought it was really, really damn cool. And even when someone told me it's not real, it's CGI, I thought, okay, but it's clearly something Amazon are planning, so that's really badass and I think that's really cool anyway. Then I realised, oh yeah, the whole thing's a joke. But I hope it is real. It's really cool. I want that to be real, damn it. What are some of the hardest sounds you had to master when learning ancient Greek? Honestly, there's not too many difficult soundings in ancient Greek. PS is pretty easy, all things considered. ZD gets a tiny bit of getting used to. So, for example, something like Zdoin. But, like, you know, ZD is not difficult to say, to be honest. There's nothing too difficult to get your tongue around in Greek at all. So, no, honestly, it was pretty much fine. John, have you ever thought you were recording and did a great take of something just to realise it was not running? I can't remember a specific example of that in terms of like something that was really spectacular that I was totally sad I missed. But I did actually, I think at one point, do about 45 minutes of a Total War Warhammer 2 video back when I was doing that series, and only realised, yeah, about 45 minutes in, I wasn't actually recording. So, thankfully, I'm pretty good at maintaining save files and like keeping them properly staggered, so in case something goes wrong, I can go back to the beginning of the episode. So, thankfully, nobody ever noticed, unless I actually mentioned it during the actual re-recording of that video. I can't recall whether I did or not. What's the minimum amount of views to make a video successful? Interesting question. Depends on the video, I suppose. Like, if a one-off breaks 50,000 views, that's really solid. In terms of a series, it really depends how long the series has been going on. Like, say, if part 2 of a series is over 35,000, that's really promising. That's looking really, really damn good indeed. Once you get to, like, say, part 20, if part 20 is north of 25,000, that'd be really good right there. I'd be perfectly fine with that. Have you considered doing a Jackbox livestream? Could be a fun way of getting some regulars in and playing the games with the entire audience. Ah, yes, because it's so short, so we could swap people in and out really easily. Not a bad idea. Could be interesting. Charity live stream when? I don't know. I need to sort that out with Claire or potentially, like, you know, find someone to work with. I mean, I was involved with the Red Nose Day thing with Dan very, very recently indeed that made some really good money. So, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do something like that. I don't know precisely when or what cause. There are many causes very close to my heart. So, keep your ears open. I don't know precisely when that's going to be. And how would you rank all of the Hitman 2 levels? Ooh, interesting. Okay, I'm going to say that Whittleton Creek is my favourite, just because it's so open and the vast majority of it is public, so you can just go where you want and there's so many little stories to find. That's really, really damn cool. After that, probably Miami, which again has lots of public areas, and I like the fact it's got the racetrack, which is a very distinctive way of handling that, and the fact that you can take out one of the targets like when they're in the car or after they come out of the car. Lots of interesting solutions there, lots of interesting ways the two areas interact with each other. Then probably Santa Fortuna. A little bit lower down because plenty of it is areas you're not allowed to be in without the right disguise, and I prefer my Hitman levels to be big and public, like the vast majority of Sapienza is in the original Hitman. Then we get into, ooh, interesting. Probably the final one, the Isle of Sigale, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. Sorry, I'm not sure how a Grav accent on an A is supposed to work precisely. And then we're into kind of like Mumbai and Hawke's Bay, which I'm not so thrilled about. I know Mumbai should be high up based on my previous criteria because, you know, it's big and open, but I find it's not visually interesting enough because all the streets look very, very similar. I don't find it easy to navigate, so I don't find it as interesting a level as Sapienza, say. And then Hawke's Bay kind of has to be last, purely because it's so small. I mean, you know, it's nicely designed for a very small level. It's a good tutorial, but it's not really a proper level. John, what was the most memorable April Fool's prank you did? I really loved the Leaks video, the one that started off in Skyrim and then it went into Medieval 2 Total War Kingdoms and then finally into Pokemon. There was a lot of effort that went into that one. Huge amounts of recording and editing time to get that one just right. So that's got to be my favourite right there. Question for Editing Claire. I've been catching up on some LGBT teen literature I missed out on when I was the target audience. Thoroughly enjoyed the Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. Any recommendations for something else heavy on sappy romanticism and true friendship? Also, what's Tabby's favourite kind of toy? She likes a little spider on the end of a stick that you can make dance for her. She likes batting at that, and she's got a little cuddly beaver who we call Drug Beaver or Druggy Bee, who's full of catnip, who she just likes playing with by herself. Those are her two favourite toys. over to Claire.
Ooh, now a happy LGBTQ plus story that I would definitely recommend is the webcomic Check Please by Ngozi Ukazu. You can just Google Check Please comic and you will find it, and it's free to go read on the internet. If you prefer to read in book form, part of it has already been published and the rest is coming, so you can try and find that at your local library. It is a lovely comic about a kid called Eric who goes to university on a hockey scholarship because he used to be a figure skater and he skates really fast, but also he is not at all your stereotypical jock hockey player, and is kind of worried that when he gets to university and they find out that he's an ex-figure skater and he's into baking, that they will have issues with him. And then it turns out to be like the warmest, loveliest story about this bonkers hockey team having adventures in basically their frat house. It's delightful. I would highly recommend it.
John, why'd you say good afternoon when all your videos go live in the evening? Oh, it gets worse than that. I mostly try and record in the morning. So very often I'm saying good afternoon in the morning and then putting it out in the evening in the UK time. I honestly can't remember. I just started doing it, and after that point, it just became a standard intro and outro because it's nice for a video to begin and end in the same way. It gives it a feeling of comforting familiarity. So I can't even remember why we do it at this point. It's pretty much just routine. Also, interesting point that you do raise, of course, I do begin with good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So as you say, technically that is actually exclusive to non-binary people. So yeah, that's interesting. I'd never even actually considered that before. So, thanks for actually raising it. So the thing is, I have actually been thinking for a while, I haven't really got around to it yet, for kind of changing the way I do videos full stop. Just because I always started doing the intro and the outro, and it's just been that way without me even really thinking about it for a long period of time. So the thing is, what I actually really would like to do at some point, and I do this sometimes, but I always kind of go back to the traditional intro and outro afterwards, is I wouldn't mind doing more cold intros and cold outros, because I like being able to dive straight into a joke or an exciting section or something, and I like, rather than having to do an outro, and sometimes the outros can waffle. The outros really bug me, because I've really got into the habit of doing the whole, but in the meantime, I've been John. There's been many a true note, but because the actual beginning to that is, but in the meantime, that means the statement before, but in the meantime, has to lead into, but in the meantime. So sometimes I actually have to do, the outro, then something that leads into but in the meantime, in order exclusively to say but in the meantime to get to the actual outro, which can mean the outros just go on for quite a period of time, longer than I really think they ought to. So there is a way I'd much rather begin a video diving straight into something that's exciting rather than doing good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, I'm John, this has been your true and welcome to this, and this is the title screen, and this is why I'm looking at this and diddly dee, and then it can take a minute, 2 minutes, whatever, before I'm actually playing the game. And in a way, I'd rather actually be able to, begin already in the game with something happening, and then I can actually just put in this is this game, this is why I'm playing it, this is my experience, as we're actually going through that first section. So, right from the first seconds of the video, we're straight into the game people actually want to see, which I think would work better in many ways, because it means we don't have to waste the first minute or 2 minutes of the video actually just on the intro screen, just looking at a start screen flashing at you. So that is something I'd like to do, and that might be a good opportunity to simultaneously get rid of the old-fashioned intro and outro. I might give it a go at some point just for a week, just to see how people react to it, and then just kind of make some decisions from there. But yeah, that's an excellent point. I'd never even really thought about it before. And not so much a question as a message here. So, Amanda, Jamie wants you to know it's all going to be okay, and he cannot wait to marry you in 2021, alright? And an interesting idea here for a Fallout setting, we've got ourselves Edinburgh being suggested. Because yeah, large parks would mean you actually had areas of kind of, rural wasteland surrounded by an urban area. And yeah, Edinburgh's got Edinburgh Castle and all sorts of fun things going on. Yeah, that'd work. The only problem would be, I think large parts of the Scottish culture that would be featured in the game would be so unfamiliar to Americans, it might not necessarily work that well for American audiences who would be confused And sure, European audiences have had to be confused for like decades about Fallout and its peculiar Americana that we don't necessarily get, but I can understand how American development teams want to keep it in that sort of a setting. So I think it will be fun. That sounds really fun to me. I'm just not sure whether the Americans would necessarily get it. Is Theresa May still Prime Minister by the time you read this? Yes, I just went to BBC News to check. At the exact moment of reading this, she is indeed Prime Minister. By the time you hear it, I don't know, but hopefully yes. Who do you think should replace her? If she goes and we're just talking about a caretaker Tory Prime Minister until we can have like a general election or whatever, I wouldn't mind Kenneth Clarke. Kenneth Clarke has always struck me as a man of decency and integrity, so that'd be fine with me for the time being. How much better do you think Brexit will be going if we were all dogs and Theresa May was a cat? Probably a lot better, but then everything is improved by more dogs and cats being around, so, you know. In the first episode of Barbarian Invasion, you called into question the accuracy of the story of Valentinian I's death. The story comes from Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Do you find him to not be very trustworthy as a source? No, absolutely not, and I'm sure there absolutely are primary sources to support that view. The problem is that lots of primary sources from the Roman imperial era are themselves not reliable, because plenty of them were not written while the emperor in question was alive, they're only written later, where you have all sorts of dynastic considerations to work in, and also patronage as a system means, yeah, you've got to be careful what the guy who's actually paying for you to live thinks before you actually write anything down. So it's not that I actually have any problems with Gibbons himself or his interpretation, I just take even things that are attested to by primary sources in Roman imperial history with a pinch of salt just in case. All things being equal, do you prefer a nice clacky noisy in a movie hackaway keyboard or a quiet subtle keyboard? Let me answer that question by actually just interacting briefly with the keyboard that's in front of me right now. Yeah, mechanical keyboards! If you could choose 6 Pokemon to help out in everyday life, which ones would you choose? Okay, let's start things off nice and practical here, which is, I want myself just a Pikachu, or honestly any electric type, but let's just go with Pikachu because whatever. We'll have him so he can provide free electricity. And we'll also have a Squirtle and a Charmander so that they can provide free heating and free water. And we don't need Bulbasaur because I don't actually need, like, you know, vines on a day-to-day basis. So, sorry Bulbasaur, you're being left out. Okay, so that's 3. That's absolutely fine. Now, Celebi's the time travel Pokemon. So, let's have a Celebi. So the previous questions about going back in time, we can do all of that. And was it Jirachi that was the wish-granting Pokemon? Yeah, let's have that, because then I can just wish for infinite wishes and everything will be fine. And Jirachi can't call me out on that, because Jirachi can just say the word Jirachi over and over. So screw Jirachi, give me my infinite wishes. That gives me 1 slot left, in which case I'll go for a Growlithe, because that's basically just a puppy, but it's super warm and toasty because it's a fire type, so I can just hug it all day. Job done. When you break Claire's equipment during the cooking videos, do replacements count as a business expense? No, I wouldn't dare try and actually defend that to my accountant or HMRC. I just pay for them out of my own money. What's your opinion about a cup of tea prepared with almond milk and cinnamon? That doesn't sound like real tea to me, dear oh flippin' dear. John, why am I so British? I was born and raised in America, but all my favourite authors, narrators and television shows are British. I even prefer tea to coffee most times. How did this happen to me? Well, the thing is, Michael, this isn't really about Britain versus America. This is about right versus wrong. Basically, you're right. You've overcome a massive genetic disadvantage to be right regardless. Basically, well done and welcome aboard. And when the redcoats show up, just don't tell anyone, okay? Lovely. Right, good. If you had to change the channel's name to something else, what would it be? I'd probably just go with the title that we originally were mooting, but we didn't go with at the end, which was Nerd to the Wise. We'd probably just be Nerd to the Wise. That'd be spot on. And what about a nickname for yourself? I'm going to go for John, but spelt with an H. That way I don't really need to change anything. I can just keep using all the same intros and whatever. John, I was wondering if you would consider doing a full playthrough for Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Not necessarily a full playthrough, because the thing about Assassin's Creed for me is, I've never actually played an Assassin's Creed game I don't enjoy, right? I've enjoyed every single one of them, but I always get bored of them before I actually finish up the campaign, because I find they just get a bit on the repetitive side, but I always do enjoy exploring them at least a little bit. So you're 100% right. I think Assassin's Creed Odyssey at the bare minimum would make a really, really good midweek mini-series of like, I don't know, 5 to 10 parts or something, right up to the point where I set myself an arbitrary target and just like go there and complete it, and don't actually try and complete the main game at all. Maybe just focus on like, visiting sites of historical interest and talking about them. Oh, that's a really good idea. I was saying earlier I want to do like a classics thing. What if rather than actually, playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey normally, I literally went from like famous site to famous site and talked about how historically accurate they were, and then also told the myths that were kind of set in those areas and the history that occurred. Oh, that's such a good idea. Claire, write that down too. And a recommendation for Mark of the Ninja by the devs of Oxygen Not Included and Don't Starve. Interesting. Might be worth a little bit of a look-see, but honestly, I didn't really enjoy Oxygen Not Included. Just wasn't a thing for me. And Don't Starve was fine. I wouldn't call it a classic. For me, it was a game that was fine, but not great. And as I say, I didn't really enjoy Oxygen Not Included at all. So I'm not sure that dev team's the right dev team for me, but I will look up the trailer for Mark of the Ninja, see if I like the look-see of it. Hey John, how's you? I'm good, thanks. Bit tired, we've been working a bit hard later. How's Claire? I don't know. Claire, how are you?
I'm really good, thank you for asking.
How's Tabby? She's good. She's curled up in a nice little circle, being a little purry bundle of sleep, and we love her. John, I was wondering if you've played much of the Last Roman DLC for Attila Total War. I've never actually played it, but I do know what it is. That's like the Justinian and Belisarius attempts to retake Europe and the Western Empire, isn't it? And I agree, that is like a really, really fun campaign. I've never played it myself, but honestly, it's quite likely that might show up ahead of the Attila base game, just because the Attila base game is, in some ways, very similar to Barbarian Invasion, so that might make a fun change of pace at some point. But don't expect it anytime soon. There's a lot of old Total War I'd probably rather feature ahead of that, to be honest. Ah, yes, and someone bringing up the Master Chief Collection coming to PC very, very soon indeed. Yes, so I've heard. Like, at the bare minimum, I will do a one-off looking at the original Halo. I can't promise it's going to be a full series because, it's a first-person shooter where the focus is on shooty, bang, bang, and it's not 100% always my thing. I do like some of them on occasion, they're just not really my core thing, so I feel like I'm not the best person to do a series on that, but 100% bare minimum there will be a one-off on the original Halo Remastered. John, you've previously said that Rome Total War is your game of choice when sick. Has this changed now you've played more games of this sort? Honestly, not so much. Probably that would still be my go-to game if I was feeling absolutely dreadful, just because I know it so well. But 100%, I could be open to playing some Civilization 6, or actually, Total War Warhammer 2. I really like Total War Warhammer 2. I think it's a really, really damn good game. So still grand strategy stuff, but maybe different grand strategy stuff. But probably if I was feeling truly dreadful, I'd still be back to Rome Total War, yeah. In your Fallout 76 Survival Mode episode near the end, you were walking around doing nothing. Is that a technique to keep people watching the screen or what? Not really a technique, to be honest, just, when I'm just wrapping up and talking about my thoughts for the game, I'd rather not be standing perfectly still because one, it's visually boring, and two, sometimes if a character's standing perfectly still, the camera just kind of flicks to one side, then starts rotating around them, and it's kind of annoying because it's a bit jarring when the camera kind of jumps to it, I'm just going to start spinning around you pose. So I just kind of keep the character moving just so something's happening on screen. There's no real reason for it, I just kind of do it so we're just not standing perfectly still for a while. Would you rather know how you're going to die or when you're going to die? I'd go for how, because if you know when you're going to die, that's going to consume you and worry you for your whole life. You're just going to waste so much time just kind of counting down to it. But if you know how you're going to die, then you can just stay away from that until you're ready to die. So probably how seems like the better tactical options. And John, can you say trans rights? I can indeed. Trans rights. And finally, back round to the beginning for the comments that have arrived since I started recording this podcast. John, thank you so much for playing Alien Isolation. Yeah, I actually recorded the earlier bit before Alien Isolation came out, and this bit's been recorded after Alien Isolation came out. Marvellous. I was part of the dev team, and seeing my favourite YouTuber play it has made my day. You're the best. Oh, congratulations, it's a really good game. There's so many good design choices in that. Good work. John, have you seen Outward? It just came out, kind of like Kingdom Come Deliverance, but with less micromanaging and more magic. Yes, I have seen that. I am meaning to give it a bit of a look-see. at some point. I haven't got round to it yet, and I don't have an exact time, but it does look rather interesting. So yeah, I agree. Seems like that would be a good video. John, I'm vaguely thinking about taking singing lessons, maybe even looking to do some amateur dramatic musical theatre, mostly just enough to gain confidence for karaoke type situations. Any advice on overcoming these sorts of confidence issues, and most importantly, thoughts on Skater Boy as an audition song? One, in terms of confidence, just do what I do and start singing even though I can't sing. Screw it, just go for it, whatever, it's fine. In terms of Skater Boy as an audition song, it depends what your goal is. If you want a nice, easy song for your audition song, yeah, Skater Boy's a great choice. Part of the reason that I kind of do sing a lot of Avril Lavigne when I have to go to a song to sing that's like a pop song is Avril Lavigne's songs require very, very limited range because I don't have great vocal range. So as a result of that, yeah, Avril Lavigne's songs like Complicated and Skater Boy make really, really easy songs to sing because, yeah, they've got very limited range too. I don't know whether Avril herself just doesn't have good range or if that just happens to be a quirk of those two songs. I think she actually does more range in other songs. Like I'm With You has some good range in it, so I couldn't sing that, for example. So, yeah, it depends what you want to do. If you're looking for a nice simple song, so something manageable for when you're still learning, Skater Boy would actually probably be a really good pick. If you're looking for something to impress people with, you might want to look elsewhere in Avril's corpus. I'm With You would probably be more impressive if you wanted to give that one a go. But yeah, definitely a lot more difficult. And on the extremely important Avril Lavigne related advice, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the questions. Thank you all so very, very much for your varied submissions. We had some really fun and some really difficult ones this month. Dear oh flippin' dear. Right, it's time for me to go and get ready for the live stream because this was actually wrapped up on Sunday. So this is being done a bit last flippin' minute. Now I need to go and get some lunch, get ready for the live stream. This will be out later tonight. Absolutely flippin' marvellous. Thanks again for your questions. Yes, some really good, interesting, in-depth questions on this occasion. Very, very interesting indeed. So thank you for all of that. And thank you all, of course, in general. You know, it's YouTube, it's early in the year. Ad revenue is still looking very, very poor indeed. So this is the thing that lets us keep going. This is what lets us keep making these good videos. We've got some really cool stuff coming up this next month. As I've been hinting at, but I can't say, I'm so sorry, I can't say a word on this. We have got something really, really damn cool coming up over the next week. You're going to flipping love it. I think loads of people are going to love it. It's great. I will tell you about it as soon as I flipping can. I'll tell you all the behind the scenes details next month in the Patroncast. It's going to be flipping great, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully you join me for that. But in the meantime, I've been John. This has been Many a True Nerd. And this has been the March, Not Even Remotely, 2019 Patroncast. Thank you very much, and goodbye.